Welcome to Punchline Talks Politics. I'm Mark Owen, the editor and owner of PunchlineGloucester.com. And today my special guest is Lisa Spivey. She is the leader of Gloucestershire County Council. Welcome to Punchline Talks, Lisa.
Good morning.
Thanks ever so much for joining us today. Well, big news from the council. Can you explain to our readers and listeners, please, about devolution and what the Gloucestershire County Council voted in yesterday, please?
Yeah, of course. So this is all part of last year in December, the government published their devolution white paper. And that was all about how powers would be devolved across England. And as part of that, they asked the areas where we have two tiers of local government to reorganise as that initial part of that process. So what we've been doing over the last 6 months is working through the options. And on Wednesday, we presented those to the council for debate.
Okay, so let me bring those up, those different options up. Okay, if you want to talk these through as well.
Yeah, sure. So basically, we had three options. One for a single unitary council across Gloucestershire. So that's just the existing footprint of Gloucestershire. And what we do is the 6 district, borough and city councils and the county council sort of disappear. And there will be one council which would take on all of those functions and deliver all the services. There's a second option, which was an east-west split. And that would take in the areas that are the districts currently of Cheltenham, Cotswold and Tewkesbury in the east, and then the west, which would be the current districts of Forest of Dean, Stroud and Gloucester City. And they would be 2 unitary authorities then, which would deliver those services and functions. And then there's a third option, which actually wasn't presented at the county council on Wednesday, which was being worked up by Gloucester City Council, and that's for a Greater Gloucester Unitary Authority. So that would look at taking in the current Gloucester City and then some of the areas around the city, and then the rest of the remaining part of the county being in a different unitary authority. But that one was worked on by Gloucester City on their own, so that's why we didn't bring it to the county council.
Okay, thank you ever so much for that. So you guys all voted into one utility. I can never say it.
Unitary.
Unitary.
Yeah. So in the end, we discussed and debated it, and in the end, I think there were 38 votes for the single unitary option, 4 who voted for the east-west split, and then 10 who abstained and didn't vote for either option.
Now, the truth of the matter is it's sometimes people think the Gloucestershire County Council has the overall arching control of everything, but it's not the way it works, is it? And the government doesn't see it that way either. So each individual area has to decide what they want to do. So Gloucestershire County Councils now have decided this, the big pie, shall we call it?
Yep.
The Gloucester City want a big donut. Obviously, they're going to be in the middle of it, and then perhaps the others might slice the whole thing in half and have 2 slices of the pie each. Which, at the end of the day, the government is trying to save money. That's what this is all about, isn't it? And
It is.
will it save money? And will they get it through in time? And how much is this all costing, Lisa? Because it's a very, very long process. I know from personal experience, just covering it has cost me £1,500 just to cover devolution because it's very, very complicated. Can you ask us some of those questions?
Yeah, it is. And I think, it's a really good point. Like you said, I think the aim from government, obviously, is they've said that they want to make things easier and they want to save money in local government. But the reality is this has cost us already a lot of money in terms of getting consultants in, going through all of the options appraisals, working up those full business cases so that we get a really good understanding of what each option means. It's also cost huge amounts of time in terms of the officers and staff from the council, especially our senior officers and leaders who've been stuck in rooms discussing how we're going to do this because it's hugely complicated. We are essentially getting rid of 7 authorities and trying to make them into 1 or 2. So that means amalgamating finance systems. It means looking at all of the assets that we own and then transferring them into the new authorities. It means looking at each of the services and how they will either come together, and in some cases come together and then potentially be divided. So it's costing huge amounts of time, huge amounts of money, and ultimately the government is saying, oh well, don't worry, because over the next 10 years you'll be able to recoup all of that. I'm not sure that we will.
It's a bit like the Police and Crime Commissioner stuff, isn't it? They said that would save money, but we can talk about that at the very end.
Yeah.
Big worry is at the end of the day, you guys, and the way I understand it, is that you're not just having to work now on what you've agreed, but because you don't know which way the government is going to go, you still have to work on the other plans just in case. Is that the case?
Well, exactly. Yeah. So what we've done obviously is that the way it works is government basically offers an invite to each local authority to put forward an option. So like you say, we've already started that process. It's going on across Gloucestershire now in all of the councils. And oh, sorry, that's my dog, Wally.
Don't worry.
Got a squeaky toy. So we will put forward an option, but the other, 6 district, city and borough councils might put forward their option. It's likely that the 3 options, as we discussed earlier, will go through. Government will then consult on that in the early part of 2026. And they've told us that they will make the decision on which option they prefer by the summer of next year. So at the moment, what we've got to do is obviously work towards an option. We don't know which one, but if we down tools now and don't keep that work streams going, then it will be very, very difficult for us to hold elections in May of 2027 and start these new council or councils. So huge amounts of work, slightly in the dark, and yeah, just keeping going really.
And then, I mean, when is this all supposed to kick in? When is it the work all is supposed to be complete?
Well, what happens is that there would be elections in May of 2027. You then elect councillors to shadow authorities. And then what government says then that the new authority or authorities come into being in May of 2028. Which is not a lot of time. But I think what we've done is, and it's good that within our chief exec cohort across the county, we do have people who've been through this process. We can learn from others. And I think what's important to recognise is that you won't have everything done on day one, that it is a long process. Because what we'd also want to make sure is that, no matter whether it's 1 or 2 unitary authorities, that what's really, really important is that we don't lose that local voice, so our communities, and that we make sure that our town and parish councils in particular are on that journey with us, and that perhaps they might want to step in, take on some responsibilities and deliver some services. So I think that is also a journey, because some of them are very well established, some are not, they're very small. And in the likes of Cheltenham and in Gloucester in particular, they don't have town councils. So that would be something that we would really need to work around, and is actually a really big issue in this reorganisation process.
It's funny, actually. My brain is bubbling away with so many different questions, actually. I don't know really where to start. I'm going to start with, at the end of the day, so we're due a general election as well. I would imagine in 2029, is that?
That's right,
around that time. So, and the other thing is that you're going to also, if you have an election in 2027, you might have a all new bunch of councillors who don't know anything about all the processes that you've gone through as well. So you're going to have all new councillors as well, which we've already just gone through, and you might have a general election in 2029, and a new government might come in and say, hey guys, we don't like this at all. What's your thoughts on that? What, I mean, I suppose
I think this kind of sums it up. Business does not like instability. Look, we don't like instability either in local government, because what we're trying to do is we've got really big services to deliver, whether that's adult social care, children's care, education, our fire service, our dealing with our roads and our highways, maintaining all of that, picking up all the rubbish. Planning, these are huge services which require forward strategic planning, and it's really, really difficult to do that when you've got so much instability. And I think you've alluded to it already. We've just seen yesterday an announcement about police and crime commissioners. This is a government which is just throwing out a lot of stuff at the moment to local government in particular. And we really do feel, I think, as a sector, very, very unsupported. We're now still waiting to find out what the fairer funding review is going to say. And that's when government has said they want to redistribute funding across the country. And we believe that here in Gloucestershire, we will be adversely affected by that, but they're not telling us yet. So we can't even set our budget appropriately because we don't know how much money we're going to have. It's a system that's under a huge amount of pressure. Perhaps, viewers and readers will have seen there's a huge amount of pressure in education around special educational needs and disabilities. That is got a massive pressure on local government. We're supposed to have a white paper on that. We're still waiting for it. So there's just huge amounts of flux. But the reality is that government is not funding local government properly. We just don't have enough money in the system at the moment to deliver the services in the way that our residents would like us to.
That's what I was going to get to next, actually, because there is no more new money to do all this. So you're using up your pots, shall we say, your savings. You're probably burning through that at a fantastic rate. You're probably using an awful lot of consultants as well to help you, because that's what you'd have to do as a business, because these are businesses. And also, I would imagine there is potential to damage the relationships between all the different councils. Now, I know very well that you guys, although you're political parties, you do get on quite well. Is that the case, isn't it?
Yeah, and that was definitely my mission as the incoming leader in May, was that I wanted to make sure that, because I recognised that this was not going to be a decision that was actually made here in Gloucestershire, that the important thing really was that we all found a space, that we worked through it collaboratively, because ultimately, although we don't decide, we're the ones that have to implement it and we have to make it work. So I've been really, really keen that we find that consensus, find the common ground, because there are very differing opinions on what the best way forward is. But ultimately, we're going to have to knuckle down, get on with it, and deliver for residents. We can't let these services fall apart. So it's been really, really good. And I know that here in Gloucestershire, actually, unlike other places, we have been able to work through those tricky discussions, have those robust conversations. And I think, we're in a place now where we respectfully have, found each argued their own position, but managed so far not to fall out about it.
Okay, because obviously, I'm going to ask you, what's your own personal preference? I can't imagine you going for a donut, by the way. I don't think you're a kind of donut person.
Oh, I love a cake. I love a donut. So
okay.
Yeah. So I think, and I said it when I spoke the other day at the council meeting, I'm a Liberal Democrat. I really believe in localism, and that decision making really should be at the lowest level possible. And I could easily have, town and parish councils making decisions, because communities really do know what's best for their area. However, I do think, and especially having been in the leadership for the last 6 months, I really can see how those big strategic directorates, so things like adults care, children's safeguarding, education, highways, I've said it, all those big things really do work better over a large area. And that's not to say that we can't and we shouldn't make sure that inbuilt within the system, there is a mechanism for local voice still to come through really strongly. So I can see why a smaller authority might seem like the best way forward, so that you can keep that local voice and that local identity, because sometimes even now, the districts and the county council can seem quite remote if you're in one part of the county from another. To get from where I am in the very southeast, in the Cotswolds, over to the northwest in the Forest of Dean, could take a good, it's well over an hour of driving, hour and a half, etc. So, it's a big geographical area, but I do think that keeping one unitary council, that wrapper, but then making sure that the neighbourhood model within that and the community voice can come through really strongly is where we should be putting our focus.
I see, that is the one thing that really worries about all this, actually. It's about democracy at the end of the day. And this is what it's fundamental to government, and that's why you're involved. That's why I love politics so much. So everyone, we all have a say at the end of the day. We don't like you, we can vote you out.
Yeah,
Figuratively speaking, no offense to you,
yeah, that's
or
yeah.
whoever. And how many so if we had this one unitary authority, how many councillors would we have suddenly all under one borough? How would that under one umbrella? How would that work?
Yeah.
Would I now only be at the moment? I've got a city councillor and I've got a county councillor. So would I lose the county councillor, or would I still have a sort of district localised?
Yeah,
How does it work? Sorry, Lisa.
it's a really no, it's a really good point, and it is, and that is one of the concerns really around reorganisation at this level, and the way the government is asking us to do this, because we are already, as we know, in Europe, we have the least amount of representation per per population per head. So right now we have with all of the district, city and county councillors, borough councillors, there's 295 councillors in total across those two layers. When we're looking at a unitary model, there would be 110 councillors in total. So we are losing a lot of councillors. My own area, I'm a county councillor, and then there are 4 district councillors as well. So that's 5 councillors. So essentially we go from 5 down to 2. So I think the representation model says 1 to 4,500 people, but that's it's not a lot,
No,
and it
and
is a
especially
lot of
when you think.
work.
I was just going to come to that, because the whole point of having all these councils, it's a tremendous amount of work. And these people, I know whether you like a council, whether you don't like a council, what your political persuasion is, they work tremendously hard. You have good and bad councillors, of course you do, but
Of
you have good and
course.
bad parties. But they do work tremendously hard, and they're not paid.
No,
Let's be honest, they're not paid very much money.
no, not at all. And I think this is kind of one of those misconceptions amongst the public, is they think that councillors have a salary and a lovely local government pension. I'm going to make it really clear, we don't. We get an allowance. There's no pension. It's a lot of unpaid long hours. Because they're, I have to say, and I think, I do it, and I think you're absolutely right. Across the political divides, I think all the local councillors that I know are doing it because they really care about their community. They really care about their area. They really want to make a difference. And so I think actually there's much more that unites us in some senses than actually divides us as councillors. And I think across the political spectrum, most people are doing it because they want to do it. But it is really, if you broke it down to an hourly rate, we'd be absolutely on slave wages. Yeah, we wouldn't even meet minimum wage. So.
But the big thing is, like anything, it's a bit like, they cut the PCSOs, the police recently, okay?
Yeah.
So they had 100, now they've gone down to 50. The work hasn't stopped. They still got the same amount of work, but they've got half the amount of people to do it. Now,
Yeah.
if you've got 4,000, you as a councillor, you represent 4,000 people, but it depends geographically where those 4,000 people are as well. So you might have a bigger area to cover.
Yeah.
And suddenly you've got even more pressure for less people who are basically volunteers,
Yeah.
for the amount of salary they get. So that's going to put more pressure. And what will actually happen, you might not attract good people to be councillors, or people of a certain age that can only afford the time, if you're retired or semi-retired,
Yeah.
and that will be, again, that will affect democracy. This is why I think it's a much bigger issue than people realise.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. You hear a lot of commentary on this, and I do think that generally here in the UK, whether it's our politicians in Westminster or right down to our local councillors, we really don't pay our representatives enough. That might seem like, oh, there she is. Oh, she's only saying that because she's a councillor, but the county council sits on of a budget of 665 million. The new unitary authority will probably have a revenue budget of 850 million pounds. It will have a capital programme of much, much more than that. We're looking at sort of upwards of 1.5 billion pounds. If that was a business, how much would you be wanting to pay the managers who were running that, I'd probably guess it would be more than £17,000 a year, which is what a unitary councillor is on.
I was
So
going to say, I'm glad you mentioned that because that was going to be my next question, actually. So I was going to be really naughty and ask you how much you do actually get paid. I'm sure it's in the
yeah.
public record somewhere. But what is the rate for a leader of
So
the county?
the right
How does it
now,
work then?
yeah, so basically, on average, and I don't know exactly in all of the places. So, at district level, the councillors are on about £5,500 a year as the allowance.
Yeah.
And then as a county councillor, the allowance is £12,500 a year.
Yeah. And
And
if
then
you're a
there are,
leader,
so I'm the leader, I get it's called a special responsibility allowance. So the cabinet members, the chairs of committees, the leader, we do get some extra money. That's absolutely true. And like say, it's all on the public record. But even then, I don't think it's commensurate to the amount of work that's done and the amount of responsibility.
I think you've nailed it. It's that responsibility. You've got a responsibility of 1.5 billion and how many? What's the population of Gloucestershire? 650,000, something like that.
It's about 650, £660,000. Also remember that, when things go wrong
Yeah.
in local government, when you have adult social care and children's safeguarding and the fire service, it's, and our highways, when things go wrong, it means that somebody has died. It's really quite a responsibility. And, I know that certainly and I know my colleagues take that very, very seriously.
And it's not just that you might end up looking after police as well.
Yeah.
From obviously now they're going to get rid of the police and crime commissioners, and from what I've read so far, again, it's all very willy, as normal with this government. Again, putting a whole load of uncertainty out there that you might actually inherit the police as
That's
well.
right. Yeah, I mean, we already we host they have the police and crime commissioners. We host the police and crime panel where we scrutinise the work of the police and crime commissioner, and that's a cross-county panel with various different members. But yeah, sort of oversight of the police. I mean, I have to say that for me personally, I've never thought that there should be a political role. I think I've never agreed with the police and crime commissioner role. I think the police should not be politicized. So I am pleased that the role will no longer exist, but it does put more pressure on it. And I think, like you said, it's the surprise. Our police and crime commissioners were not expecting this announcement.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh.
And that is the thing. I think this is not a government who's working really in partnership with delivery of service. So it's very, very centralized. We're being told what to do. It's very much a diktat from the centre, and coming out. As I said before, I'm a really big fan of partnership working. It's what I've tried to do since I've come in as the leader. I think it's really, really important. You really can't do things on your own, and it's really important to take partners with you on a journey, because sometimes there are difficult conversations. Things aren't always easy. Not everybody will agree all the time on what the best way forward is. But unless you have those conversations, it was a real shock yesterday when this announcement just literally came out of the blue. There was no discussion, as far as I'm aware, or any even pre-warning, other than, in the morning, this is going to come out. And suddenly it was all over the media. People were finding out that their jobs were gone because they'd read it on the news. I mean,
it's a bit like chucking a dead cat on a table, the old distraction Trumpian trick. Only the trouble is the dead cat no one's really interested in, and the general public don't know who the police and crime commissioner is. I mean, I do, because I work very closely with them, and I really like them. But I totally agree with you. It should never have been politicized in the very first place. It was just crazy, and they fought each other on a political grounds as well. That's what made it worse. It was so obvious.
Yeah, I mean, we should be enforcing the law, and helping and supporting communities. That's their job. So.
Okay, so you've been in post 6 months now.
That's right. Yeah.
Are you enjoying the job, Lisa?
Oh, it's absolutely fascinating. It's a brilliant job. It's really is, a real pleasure and a privilege to have this role, to be able to serve the people of Gloucestershire. I work with fantastic people, whether that's, other councillors as part of our Liberal Democrat administration, or indeed the wider officers and senior staff at the council. It's absolutely fascinating. Everybody, I think, is really trying very, very hard in difficult circumstances. So yeah, it's a job that I look forward to every day.
And how do you divide your time up between your constituents in South Cerney and obviously being leader of the council? Because you are doing two jobs again,
Yeah,
as well as the other stuff.
no, I'm not going to lie. It's tricky, and at the moment, especially because I'm new in post as the leader, and because we've had a change of administration and local government reorganisation. So the last 6 months have been quite internally focused and trying to get us to the position we're at on local government reorganisation. Like I say, bringing everybody together, holding that space has been tricky. But also on Wednesday, we presented to the council our council strategy for the next 4 years. So that's also been a big piece of work. So I'm really pleased to get that done. And in the next couple of weeks, we'll be putting out our first budget for consultation. So these are really chunky, big bits of work and strategic level. So I'm hoping now to have much more time to focus back onto my constituents and being out and about a bit more in the community.
Now, I'm very fortunate because I travel all over the county delivering my magazines, as you know. And I
Yes.
actually go to South Cerney, by the way. It is a
Oh,
beautiful part of the woods. And then from South Cerney, I actually ended up the way that it worked out. From South Cerney, I had to drive all the way to Ross and White to deliver in Ross and White. So again,
ah,
geographically, I
yes,
understand that kind of area. And it is huge, huge,
it is.
huge space. And what is amazing about the county is the diversity of the county itself, from industry, and real areas of poverty as well
Yeah.
within it. People don't realise how poor Cheltenham is than you have it, all over, isn't it?
Well,
As the leader, I mean, how do you kind of prioritise that, trying to help those sorts of areas? You don't know, I maybe don't know, but I really support No Child Left Behind,
yeah.
initiative by, and we help raise the money for Cheltenham Borough Council's campaign for that.
Oh, great.
Something I feel very passionate about. But yeah, how do you sort of highlight? How do you get the time and energy to manage all that, Lisa? Sorry.
Well, it does, and I don't do it on my own,
No.
clearly. And I've got very deliberately, actually, when we looked at the portfolios and the remit of cabinet. So I've got nine, there's 10 of us in total in our cabinet and our executive. And I've got fantastic cabinet members who are really doing absolutely brilliant jobs in their own individual portfolios. And I kind of keep an overarching view on everything, and I try and dip my toes into a bit of everything. Um, yeah, I think it's been interesting, the point you've just made about deprivation. We've had recently the publication of the indices of deprivation in the areas where they are. And I think what was really interesting is that we saw there that there were places in Gloucester and in Cheltenham, which, in our bigger more urban conurbations, that perhaps you would expect. But what I found actually quite actually, it was interesting to know that there are places like the Forest of Dean are apparently got very, very low deprivation. Actually, we know that's simply not true. I know that as well, even in the Cotswolds, you think beautiful, bucolic Cotswolds, everybody's really rich, the king lives there. But actually, we know that rural
Yeah.
service delivery and actually accessing services. So if you're in need in an urban area, you could probably access services. You can walk, there's public transport. If you're in a rural area, it's really, really very difficult. And I think what you've just kind of alluded to is we have then pockets of deprivation which are really not acknowledged, and they're not recognised. So I recognise that. I know about it. So we're putting a real focus on that. Got Julian Took, who's the cabinet member for business and economic development. He's putting a real focus actually into the Forest of Dean. Not just there, but we've recognised that is an area which really does need some help and has massive potential to be, a really, really fantastic beacon of tourism, of ecotourism. Got really great the heritage of industry in the forest. So something that we really want to build on, and it just needs that little bit of focus and attention. And we'll use that in a way, hopefully, if that works, then to move that around to other places within the county. But, we do have loads going on here. And I don't want anybody to think that Gloucestershire doesn't have so much going on. And actually, even within industry, advanced manufacturing, we've got cyber, we've got AI, tech. We're not just an agricultural stronghold as well. And I think that's what's really important for people here in Gloucestershire, but wider remit to recognise, with Golden Valley, huge ambition for the county and everything that it has to offer.
I think let's end on the positives. There are so many great businesses, so many entrepreneurs
Yeah.
out there, so much good stuff happening. I'd be very keen as Punchline, by the way, to help you with get those messages across about trying to help those poorer areas. And I've met Julian a number of times, by the way, so I'm looking forward to work with him.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, he's
before
really,
I
really
wrap up,
great. Yeah, so that's that, you talk about that, I've got really great people with energy and enthusiasm and huge amount of experience as well in business and in each of their individual sectors. So
I think that's what I've been really impressed with your cabinet. Actually, I don't want to blow smoke, but I really do think that you've got a great cabinet. You've got Joe Harris looking after transport and stuff like this. And Julian. Really, I met someone the other day with the sports and culture.
Paul
Again,
Hodgkinson?
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It really is a rounded good cabinet. I would
Yeah.
like to touch on the old demise of G First LEP and what's happening on the business, but I think we'll leave that for now because there's so much more in depth we could talk about. I just want to finish off that we are doing a budget special
Yep.
on the coming out on the 28th, which I know, Lisa, you've kindly kindly agreed to come on that. The other people on the panel is Ian Mean, Glenn Collybourne from Hazewoods, Neil Ricketts, and the old MP, ex-MP Richard Graham is going to be on that panel to discuss the budget and our thoughts on that. So I'm looking forward to that. Lisa, I just want to wish you all the very best. Thank you ever so much for the time. If you like the show, please like, share, and subscribe. And we'll be back again very shortly. But in the meantime, remember, it's all in the punchline. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.